your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Around the round table, Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice, and he, of course, is the senior counsel for First Liberty Institute. We're going to talk about some of these Supreme Court cases, as well as a few other legal issues. And then, of course, we have the whole idea of health care repeal. And what will that mean now that we have a little better understanding of what the United States Senate might propose? And, of course, we had a very special election this week in Georgia and the impact that this might have in the future. So we have a lot to cover, as we always do here on our weekend edition. Penna, looking forward to all the things we'll have a chance to discuss.
You know, I know we're going to talk about the Georgia race later, but as I hear this unpacked, I see that the Democrat candidate got fewer votes than the last person that ran against Tom Price there in that district, and he didn't even spend any money.
Yes.
But Ossoff spent, what, $30 million?
$50 million overall, and it's just like, this is the most expensive congressional race. Now, Jeremy's a little bit younger. We're a little older. At least I'm the oldest one around the table. And I remember a time when they had that first congressional race where they spent $1 million on it. Now, that's a few decades ago, but still, it was like nobody could even get their head around spending $1 million for one race for the United States Congress. This one, $50 million. And, of course, the Democrats, in this case, had nothing to show for it.
No, and they're not saying that. They're saying, oh, we learned lessons. You know, this will help us in the long run. I'm like, I don't think so.
Jeremy, that's called winning by losing, right? And in the sports world, I hear that every once in a while, too, but I don't take it any more seriously there.
I don't like to win by losing. I like to just win. And I think importantly to bring up in the discussion for all of us that are listening, especially Planned Parenthood put in almost $1 million into that campaign.
Yes.
So it's good that they've drained some of the resources there, but for what purpose? They've gotten nothing out of it. They're so desperate to keep their federal contracts alive, to provide them hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. They're able to spend almost $1 million to prevent a pro-life Republican from getting in the office.
Well, again, that is our third article, and I would encourage you to read that. And I might post some others next week, because this one by Rich Lowry is pretty interesting, too, about how Democrats view the culture and the rest. But I did want to get to the Supreme Court. One of those cases, which we mentioned just briefly this week, because we knew we had Jeremy coming in. And this is a case where the Supreme Court ruled 8-0. It would be 9-0 if Neil Gorsuch had been there to hear oral arguments. And I've said before, you can hardly get 9 Supreme Court justices to agree that the sky is blue. So this one was pretty significant. It had to do with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, which refused to register a trademark from a group. And when I was talking with millennials, even though they know a lot of groups, they'd never heard of this Asian American band called the Slants. But Jeremy, help me out here. This gets back to this idea of viewpoint discrimination, something you talk about and everybody at First Liberty talks about on a regular basis.
Yeah, in fact, we just did this last week, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But viewpoint discrimination is the doctrine that basically says the state wants you to convey a specific message, but more importantly, they don't want you to convey the message that you want to convey. And so the point of view, sorry to pull in the pun of the show, I guess, but the point of view that the speaker wants to speak is against the ideas of the state itself. And so the state is saying you can express this point of view, or you can express that point of view, but you may not express, in most of our cases, a religious point of view. And in this case, it was actually something akin to not appropriate language, or maybe some racial overtones to the name of the band. But the Trademark Office was told, no, you can't engage in viewpoint discrimination even when you're approving a trademark. That's an impressive standard to set. I told you that we referenced this just last week. And in fact, I was up in Pittsburgh last week where a graduating senior was chosen to give her closing remarks.
That's right.
She controlled the message that was there, chosen through neutral criteria. But the school district, when they got a hold of the speech, said, oh, whoa, there's too much religious talk in here. You can't talk like that. We want you to convey messages of inspiration and hope, so long as those are not religious messages of inspiration and hope. That is what we call classic viewpoint discrimination. And in the past, the Supreme Court has said that is the most egregious form of content discrimination that is out there. So I hope I'm not getting too far into the legal weeds of things
it's
here.
all
but
good.
the reality is that we don't want the state telling us what message you may or may not say. That is the quintessence of free speech.
Okay, part of Alito's opinion that he wrote, speech may not be banned on the ground that it expresses ideas that offend. I think that's huge. In a sense, that affects lots of other things, speech codes on campus and other issues that we've been dealing with.
Absolutely, and especially religious liberty cases, right? I mean, there's a lot of religious messages, be that from a Christian or a Buddhist or a Islamic or Jewish perspective. There are a lot of messages that will offend. Take, for instance, our clients in California who are trying to engage in a millennia-old religious ceremony that involves a chicken, right? That is an offensive message to use that chicken and then to ultimately slaughter the chicken in a kosher manner. The animal rights activists find great offense to that act, and yet it is something that is quintessential, that is absolutely protected by the First Amendment. We've proven that, of course, in the federal case, and we're waiting for a verdict in the state court case in that case as well. But yes, that's what the First Amendment was put into place, that we would be able to be offended by ideas, but yet preserve the space for us to pursue the truth with one another.
You know, this column that I posted here, and this one's by David French, who we quote so often here, it basically says, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, that some of the other professors and professors that are in law schools, but also presidents and professors at secular schools, didn't get the memo, because you have some comments here about an individual that says, well, speech could be violent, so we can't have that. Speech could even be emotionally and physically harmful. Can't have that. Of course, then we have the ongoing debate and conflict that's taken place at Evergreen State College in the state of Washington. And I just seemed to me that if this is one place where the court, I think, rightly ruled on a case having to do with the Patent and Trademark Office, if you applied that elsewhere, some of those issues we talk about every single week here on Point of View, we wouldn't be talking about.
Yeah, you're no kidding. I mean, look, the First Amendment was put in place to preserve the right to be, well, I hate to say it this way, but the right to be offensive at times, because you're going to offend individuals. The problem that we've seen in our culture today is that we don't want to be offended anymore. And yet we seem to think that we can use the First Amendment not as a shield to prevent the government from telling you what you can and cannot say, but as a shibboleth, a club to be able to prevent people from saying what you disagree with.
Okay, the big question people are asking about this case is, what does it do about the name Washington Redskins for a team?
Yeah, well, and it goes on throughout high school levels as well, and a number of other offensive things like that. I think it leaves open the door that they can, in fact, use that trademark. Now, whether that's the politically right thing or the most business-wise move for them to make, that's up to them to make.
That's up to them.
But the court has said that you have the right to be offensive and lose money if you don't change your name, I suppose, or increase money. It depends on how the odds turn out on all that. But they have the right to be able to pursue that.
Yes. Well, and again, 8-0, in which the Supreme Court said that bureaucracy that in one way or another said politically correct, incorrect statements cannot be registered or trademarked. No, they can be registered as well. That affects, I think, the Washington Redskins and a variety of other groups. Let's take a break, though. We have a couple of other cases, First Liberty cases, we'll get into next. But again, if you'd like to read some of this, it is the second article we've posted there, The Anti-Free Speech Radicals. It's a piece by David French. Gives you a little bit of understanding on this particular case, but also then expands it to look at some of these other issues we talk about so often here on Point of View. Privileged to have in studio with us today, Penna Dexter, Jeremy Dice. He, again, is the senior counsel with First Liberty. He's got another case we want to talk about, and that will happen as soon as we come back from these important messages. Stay tuned.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, there was a time 50 years ago when we had fewer safety devices and less parental supervision. Yet most of us survived. Some of us had accidents, but others were lucky to get out of childhood without even as much as a broken bone. Edward Costner writes about accidents in his column on how not to step on that banana peel. He quotes from Steve Kastner, author of the book Careful, A User's Guide to Our Injury-Prone Minds, that deaths from accidents declined for decades but now have begun to rise. The rise in accidents is due to everything from smartphones and driving distractions to the reality that people are living longer and thus have more opportunities to die in accidents. Why do we have these avoidable accidents? One reason I just mentioned are distractions. It turns out that people can't really concentrate on multiple tasks. We convince ourselves that we can do it when we can't. In fact, we have trouble concentrating on a single task for very long before our attention wanders. He says multitasking is a myth. It generally means doing two things badly at the same time. Remind yourself or someone to do something in a few minutes and it will be forgotten. A second major reason for preventable accidents is overconfidence. Steve Kastner's book surveys research done by a number of psychologists. Their studies invariably show that people are overconfident about their own capabilities, more open to risk than they imagine, less cool in a crisis, and prone to error. And a third reason is what is called risk homeostasis. This is the tendency of people to accelerate their dangerous behavior when new safety features are introduced, say by driving even faster in cars with the latest safety technology. So many accidents are avoidable if we apply some of the lessons psychologists have learned. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Don't forget, we're coming to our fiscal year end. In just a few minutes, I'll have a little bit more to say about that. In studio with us, Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dyes, and he, again, is the senior counsel for First Liberty. And Jeremy, let's talk about some of these other cases. You had one that you hoped would go to the Supreme Court. Well, actually, a couple that you hope would go to the Supreme Court. So talk about some of those cases that we need to know about.
Well, Monica Sterling was the one that we'd hoped to go to the Supreme Court, and they declined her appeal. And if you followed that case at firstliberty.org/Sterling, you know that it was a case in which a young lady who's in the Marine Corps had stuck a Bible verse on her workstation. The officer didn't like that, told her to take it off. She refused. And long story short, she was ultimately court-martialed partly for the removal or for refusing the order to remove that Bible verse from her workstation, even though other people had quotes from, secular people like Vince Lombardi and others who they would who they want to hear inspiration from. And we go back here again to viewpoint discrimination. This is the same kind of thing here. And we wanted the court to review that because we wanted to ensure that our members of the Marine Corps, and especially of all of our service members, that they retain their religious liberty while they're working to preserve ours. And so we're disappointed on that, but we're going to continue to fight for our men and women in the armed forces so that they don't lose an ounce of their religious liberty as they go forward in their work. This week we got word back from the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. That sits in Denver, Colorado. We had a Kansas woman who's our client who late one night had the police come to her door. She couldn't see through the little peephole, so she didn't open it. And they came back, and ultimately it was police officers, and she said, well, look, I don't have to let you in my room. They're demanding that they enter her apartment. And she said, she holds up her pocket constitution, says, this says I don't have to let you in here without a warrant. And they literally said to her, that's just a piece of paper, doesn't work here. And so they continue to really berate her and just living by herself, an older lady and all this. She gets scared that because they keep telling her she's going to go to jail. They're there over a noise complaint. And so that she gets scared and she says, do you mind if I pray? And they just kind of say, whatever.
So they're in there by now.
They're in the house, in the apartment. They've been there for actually quite a while, all over a noise complaint, which they don't reveal till an hour into the investigation. But ultimately, she gets down on her knees to pray. Another officer walks back in, had been away, orders her to get up off the ground and stop praying so that they could figure out what kind of thing they were going to invent to charge her with. Well, anyway, we argued that that was a gross invasion, that people ought to be allowed to pray in their own home without fear of the government telling you otherwise. The other side, by the way, in their argument said that the First Amendment doesn't let you have that kind of freedom in your home. The First Amendment is just meant so that you can pick which religion you want to be a part of. That's what it actually preserves.
You can pick it but not practice it.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so we kind of demolished that. But the court this week ruled against our client, denied her appeal, but did say at the outset that clearly the First Amendment had been violated, but there's a legal doctrine that shielded the officers of some liability, which leads us to the conclusion, and as I think it only can, that what the officers actually said, that the Constitution is just a piece of paper, may in fact be true. That if the court is not going to impose liability on these police officers for their egregious behavior in ordering a member of the American public to stop praying in their own home, then the promises written on that piece of paper are worthless. They are simply a piece of paper for us to ignore.
Well,
so this is some kind of immunity that the officers have because they're officers?
Yeah, it's a doctrine called qualified immunity, which means that they're shielded of liability unless there's a doctrine that is so pervasive that they should have known that it was going to violate the Constitution. Now, we believe that the officers should have known that telling a woman in her own home not to pray would, in fact, violate the Constitution. But at the very minimum, now all officers within the 10th Circuit ought to be on notice that that kind of behavior is going to be violative of the Constitution. And so it seems like you can get kind of a first pass and violate it without being caught, and then the next person's going to get stung.
Amazing.
Wow. That was always, to me, when you shared the case with us at the beginning, a very interesting case. But do you think because of this, is there any point in taking it further?
Well, we're evaluating that right now and trying to figure out exactly where that's going to go. But, you know, they said in the opinion, the court said in the opinion that, look, we've been stung on this issue a couple times ourselves, that the Supreme Court has not liked our qualified immunity doctrine down here. That certainly is weighing into our consideration as to whether or not that's something that is worth bringing another challenge to the Supreme Court to have them answer.
Well, again, you've brought so many different cases. We can think of Eric Walsh and some of these others where you've had some victories, but these are ones that aren't as positive, but still you have an incredible track record in terms of some of the cases, and that's all the more reason to continue to support organizations.
I guess now
like
we're
First
winning
Liberty.
by losing, right?
Yeah.
Do you think, in one sense, because it's true that First Liberty wins most of its cases, I mean, at least at some point on the way up, but do you think that these two losses close together, in a sense, show that there's more opposition to religious liberty that's growing and taking hold in the country?
Well, look, you can look at our publication every year on Undeniable, our annual survey of religious hostility in America, and that is truly undeniable. I mean, clearly religious hostility is growing in the last couple of years, and it grows year over year. So that certainly is a problem. But I think it also points to the judiciary, its importance, and some of these cases, but also informing the judiciary as to the importance of these matters as well. So, you know, I think we'll talk about it maybe later on, but the judges that are open right now on the circuit courts of appeal, at the district court levels, and then even if any were to come open on the Supreme Court, they are extremely vital. But most of the cases that we're going to hear, or that the courts are going to hear, are going to take place at the circuit court and district level, and those get closer and closer to home the further down you go.
A week from today will be the final day for the Supreme Court, usually when they drop the big bombs, if they have any, and then head off to England or France or Germany or wherever they might be. But after that point in time, is it possible, Jeremy, that you would have another opening on the Supreme Court? There have been a lot of people speculating about that.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of rumors flying around Washington, D.C. right now from what I've heard, and for good reason. You've got Justice Ginsburg, I know, who's 84, I think, so just time is not really on her side for much longer of things, and not that I'm excited about anyone passing away, but that's just kind of the reality. Justice Kennedy is also getting advanced in years and has had some health issues in the past. I understand Justice Sotomayor also may have some diabetic issues that are preventing her or causing her some issues here and there. So lots of things could happen. I guess Justice Thomas or Roberts could get hit by a bus crossing the street. You never know what can happen on these things. Again, not advocating any of those things, and I wish them all long and a healthy life. But at any moment, we could have a Supreme Court justice open up where we're going to see another strenuous fight over that nomination and confirmation. But, you know, I think there are still about 120 seats open on the circuit courts of appeal right now and the district courts that are out there throughout the country. And since probably 500,000 of those cases are being heard by those judges, whereas about 80 are being heard every year by the Supreme Court, you can see where the attention needs to be focused.
Well, and as you just pointed out, the 10th Circuit Court, there's one where it probably won't go any further. So, again, pay attention to some of those. And a lot of that's happening behind the scenes. And Kelly Shackelford has told us that he's been working along with other people to make sure that we have the right kind of justices on the district court and the circuit court.
Do we have time before the break for just another mention of a case?
The Mississippi case. You
Yeah,
wanna talk about that?
Mississippi, the
Sure.
Fifth Circuit. This was a good ruling, and it's really basically a challenge to Mississippi's act that exempts people that stand up for their convictions on marriage, that marriage is between a man and a woman, and there are lots of repercussions to that. I think this may be the first case that's been argued this high on this issue. They agree that this law can go into effect, and so, that's a good thing. I don't know if it'll be appealed to the Supreme Court. If it was, the Supreme Court went the right way, we'd have bakers and we'd have people that don't want to perform same-sex weddings able to say so. We'd have people to be able to act on their conviction that marriage is between a man and a woman. That's been a big battle, Jeremy. So what do you think about this ruling?
Well, anytime religious liberty is upheld, that is good for our country. And I think what you see in this act is just the prodigy of what Senator Kennedy started back in the 1990s with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. This is just a version for the state there, where Senator Kennedy and President Clinton both spoke highly. I recall Senator Kennedy saying something to the effect of, not every victim of religious discrimination is going to win under this law, but at least we're going to stand up for the principles of freedom. So, I'm grateful for the leadership of Senator Kennedy, Senator Hatch at the time, and then later President Clinton to sign the bill into law, and then later the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, kind of a complement to that federal statute of RFRA. They saw at that time the need to preserve religious liberty, and there still continues a need for us as states and as legislatures to ensure that we're fully protecting the religious liberty of our people.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we will get into a couple of other issues. But if you've found yourself saying, boy, I learned a lot more about the law than I thought I'd know, that may be another good reason as we come to the end of our fiscal year, which happens next Friday, which is June 30th. We really encourage you to consider what you might do to support this ministry. If you go to the website, you'll notice that we have a banner here, Help Bridge the Great Divide, Give Now. And we encourage you to give to this ministry. We need your financial support. As you've heard us mention before, we moved into a new studio, and that has a few expenses associated with those, and we have a matching challenge. So that means your gift of $50 becomes $100. A gift of $100 becomes $200. So go to the website, pointofview.net. We're also taking your calls at the pledge line for your gift, 800-347-5151. We'll be right back.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Before we get into the health care discussion and debate, and there will be probably an extensive one, and we certainly welcome your phone calls on that, did want to just look back over the election on Tuesday. This is the 6th congressional district, and this is one that Tom Price has been the representative for, of course, now as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. This was one that a lot of money and time and energy and expectations were poured into the district. So, Penna, tell us a little bit more about what you've learned as you've had a chance to do a little bit of a postmortem on what happened.
Well, this was a seat that's been held by Republicans for 40 years, Newt Gingrich's seat, actually, in Congress. And Trump defeated Hillary by 2 points there. That's, I think, why the Democrats thought they perhaps had a chance. And so the money, I think it was... well, I'm not sure the percentages, but a huge percentage of the money for the Democrat Ossoff came from out of state. A lot from, Hollywood elites. I mean, people that just really saw this as a referendum on Trump and, maybe a shot across the bow for retaking Congress. And it didn't work out for them. But the amount of money spent on this race, as we said at the beginning of the show, was $50 to $60 million for both of them. And, there were 11 candidates that ran on the Republican side, and Karen Handel got the most votes, so this was a runoff. And Jeremy mentioned that Planned Parenthood put $734+ million into the race. Karen Handel, very interestingly from that, she was the person at, she used to be a VP at Susan B. Komen. She's the one that pulled money from them that was going to Planned Parenthood. She ended up getting fired over it, or at least leaving over it, and writing a book about it. So that was an interesting Planned Parenthood battle in this race. But there was a lot more, and I just think one something that was brought up the whole time was that Ossoff didn't even live in the district. He'd grown up in the district, but he didn't live there. He wasn't very experienced. He was kind of liberal, but then he moved into the middle to run this race. He tried to be more of a moderate Democrat, even to sound like a Republican a lot of things. But I don't think anybody was really buying it. And it would have probably sped up GOP retirements if he had won. It would have discouraged the GOP. It would have been discouraging to this White House. So I think as far as the Trump agenda and Congress, now Congress could actually capitalize on this by doing some really good legislation. I hope that's what happens.
Yeah, let's hope so. They've been kind of quiet, even though they've got a majority in both houses and the presidency as well. There's not a lot that seems to be going on. But, I know this district fairly well as well. I've done a lot of vacation time there. I used to live not too far from there. It certainly has been, of recent years, a conservative district since Gingrich on. But don't forget, this was at one time a very strong Democratic area as well. Not the kind of way we think of Democrats today necessarily, but certainly was more of a blue dog Democratic base, as was much of Georgia not that far long ago. So it's not something that folks that are of the conservative bent should give up on and never assume that you can lose. But it is nice to see that the coffers have been drained, such that folks are calling for Speaker Pelosi or Leader Pelosi to move on from the titular head of the Democratic Party.
Well, let's talk about that for just a minute, because Rich Lowry talked about the fact that it is possible that John Ossoff could have moderated even more than Penna talked about, because he still pretty much took an uncompromising stance on abortion, guns, immigration, things like that. And so it was real easy to hang Nancy Pelosi around his neck. And one of the things that Rich Lowry said is the Republicans never would have been able to use the Pelosi play against Senator Zell Miller, for example, an old blue dog Democrat from Georgia, or even a moderate former Governor Roy Barnes. So in some respects, if he had been willing to say, on a couple of these issues, I have some personal convictions, but I recognize where my constituents are, that might have helped. But it didn't work very well, because there just aren't very many blue dog Democrats out there anymore.
They're kind of a dying breed. And the Democrat Party, at one point, even under when Rahm Emanuel was kind of being sort of overseeing elections and picking candidates, they would pick a pro-lifer in a district where the pro-lifer had a chance. They would never do that now.
Yes.
You have to hew to some of the certain Democrat positions to even be a candidate and get any support from the party. So I don't know if that will change because of this race. There's also been 3 other congressional races since Trump took office that Republicans have won. So, it gives them some momentum.
Well, and again, back to the Nancy Pelosi issue. I'd like to hear your comments, Jeremy, because here you got the minority leader, Nancy Pelosi. Some are even saying it's time for her to step down. And when you have Tim Ryan, who actually challenged her last time, a Democrat from Ohio, saying our brand, that is the Democratic brand, is worse than the Trump brand, which is pretty amazing for a Democrat to say that about your own fellow Democrats. There is going to be a little turmoil up there on Capitol Hill, don't you think?
It's got to be real hard for Nancy Pelosi to hear that her brand is worse than President Trump. And then again, she sometimes forgets that it is President Trump that's in the office and not President Bush from the reports that I see as well. So it's hard to tell where things stand, but look, there comes a natural cycle to politics all the time.
Yes.
It just does seem like the Democrats today are holding on to the politics of yesteryear and keeping the kind of vaunted saint of the Democratic Party in the office right now. Maybe that's just out of respect or what, or maybe there's an iron grip there that she's retained to that seat. I don't know. But it certainly is not one that I would share the ideology of the office holder in any stretch. I do also think the race is a good reminder to people that are in the state house in particular, that in fact these conservative issues are preferable by the voters over the liberal ones. And I say that with specific regard to issues like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, where you have a conservative population of voters there that are expecting you to protect their fundamental liberties and not kowtow to Delta and Home Depot and others that are telling you to push the envelope on a variety of different issues, and calling you names if you stand up for things as simple as religious liberty. So it's good for us to be reminded, and especially those leaders there in the state, starting with the governor on the way down, that these conservative issues are still winning issues today.
Well, I, for one, hope Nancy Pelosi stays in the House because, some of the face of the Democrat Party now is kind of old. I mean, you had Hillary Clinton running for president. And, I read something this week that if they were to pick a candidate right now, it would be Joe Biden. And then you have Nancy Pelosi. So, they're kind of old. And, Donald Trump was older than Hillary, but he doesn't seem that old.
Yeah.
To some degree. But I do want to mention an issue that, maybe the Democrats might want to think about not placing all their energy in the Russian collusion issue because it doesn't seem to have helped Ossoff.
Well, and that's exactly what Jim Garrity, the piece we've posted here, said that, I go back. This is one of the quotes comes from Chris Murphy, and he actually gets on commuter buses and listens to what people say. And I remember years ago, one of the associates to George Herbert Walker Bush used to go to bowling alleys and listen to how people would talk. And interestingly enough, again, to his credit, Chris Murphy says, I don't hear anybody talking about Russia. I don't hear any of these issues being raised at all. But just before we take some phone calls, because we do have some calls coming in, Penna, I wanted to ask you an obvious question, and that is we were told during the 2016 election that the reason Hillary Clinton lost is because we're a misogynistic culture. We could never vote for a woman as president. We're anti-woman. Well, in this particular case, a woman won there, but the Democrats didn't seem to be cheering. What about that?
No, they don't. In fact, she's being critiqued and shown as anti-woman by the left because of her position on life and marriage and some of those other things. So it's not really, that's just a canard. And it's really just, if you take a left position, we'll support you.
Yeah, so if you're a woman and a liberal, then, we're excited about your election. But if you're a woman and a conservative, we're going to vilify you. And that's certainly the case for
you're a traitor to women.
Yeah, for even some of the conservative African Americans and things like that. We need to take a break, and when we come back, we'll take some phone calls. But then we will also get into the issue of health care. The Senate has spoken, and so we have a couple of interesting things to talk about there. You have, of course, the American Health Care Act from the House. Now we have the Senate version, Transform American Health Care, and so we'll see whether or not this particular set of changes that the Senate have made are enough. A number of individuals, starting with Ted Cruz and a number of other individuals, have expressed concerns. Now Ted Cruz has actually put forward some amendments that he would add to it. So is that enough to bring around Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, Rand Paul, and Ron Johnson? Well, we'll find out. And if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. As I mentioned just a minute ago, we're coming to the end of our fiscal year, and if you haven't had a chance to go to our website, please do so. Click on the button and it says Help Bridge the Great Divide, and we also have a matching challenge there for your gift, and that means that your gift of $50 could be $100. I hope some of you might even consider joining with us on a monthly basis. We've talked about this before. The Truth Team, for $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year, you can be part of this as well. And that is a way in which you can support this ministry and have the kind of conversation that we have here every single day. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, we'll take some more of your phone calls, and that number is 1-800-351-1212. We'll talk about health care. What does it mean to you and your family? All that coming up right after this.
At Army bases across the country, mandatory transgender integration training began last week that will extend to all officers and civilians who work with soldiers. The United States Army is preparing leaders to deal with biological men being allowed in women's showers, gender transition care, including gender reassignment funded by the taxpayer, and even male pregnancies. The policy undermines privacy, already in short supply in the military. It requires that service members' sleeping bathroom and shower facilities be assigned according to a person's gender marker. This is the gender on a person's birth certificate and official documents. A person who goes through a gender transition can get their gender marker changed. So women who are uncomfortable showering with biological men will either have to convince their commanders to make special accommodations or put up with it. Our taxes will fund this nonsense. On July 1st of last year, the military began allowing transgender service members to serve openly. On July 1st of this year, the military services are scheduled to begin allowing transgender individuals to join the armed forces. The new policy also allows for a person's gender transition to take place after he or she has joined the military, with the related care and treatment, other than gender reassignment surgery, provided within the military system for medical care. Here's a scenario in a training vignette. A soldier undergoes a transition from female to male, but without surgery. This soldier then stopped taking hormones in order to start a family. A soldier who then becomes pregnant is entitled to the same prenatal and other medical care, administrative entitlements, and leave other pregnant soldiers get. The taxpayer funded the female to male transition and is also on the hook for the pregnancy. This is nuts and risks making the military a magnet for the gender confused. The current administration is under pressure and may revise this Obama-era directive. The Department of Defense should abolish it completely. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we're going to spend some time now talking about health care, and I suspect this will generate a number of phone calls, and if you want to ask questions, you are free to do so. I might mention that next week we'll have Dr. Merrill Matthews in, and he'll give us a little bit of a perspective on this. We have two different kinds of bills when you get right down to it, because you have the American Health Care Act, which was passed by the House. Then we have now the unveiling of what's called the Better Care Reconciliation Act of 2017. Now, Avik Roy's been on this program before, actually believes that this is a substantial improvement because when the health care bill came out from the House, I think he said it was a great program, but would make coverage unaffordable for millions. Otherwise, it's great. And he was being somewhat facetious, but he was also being honest. There was a problem in that how the various tax credits would be implemented could really put especially elderly that are on Social Security or something like that in a difficult situation. So one of the problems that many people had identified with the House bill seems to be resolved by the Senate bill. But that being said, you, as I mentioned just a minute ago, have at least 4 senators who said that they could not vote for it in its current circumstances. That would be Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, Rand Paul, and Ron Johnson. And since you need 50 votes, I think this puts a person like Ted Cruz, who's got some amendments he wants to add, in the driver's seat, don't you think?
So Rand Paul's quote is, "This bill needs to look more like we're repealing Obamacare and less like we're keeping Obamacare." Ted Cruz, he started at the beginning of the process working on the bill, but then it was written by Mitch McConnell and company, and so these 4 didn't even really know what was in it. I do think Ted Cruz would love to sign a bill, and he's going to swallow a lot to do it, but he's not going to swallow all of this. And that's the case for Mike Lee, too. They're going to have to work on something else. But we're not going to get a full repeal of Obamacare. We're just not going to get it.
Not on the first round, at least, for sure. Yeah.
I think in some cases, you can start with something and keep moving more keep passing more to make it more conservative. It's better than leaving Obamacare there. That's what I've come to think. And before, I wanted to be very pure as we repealed Obamacare, but I'm starting to see the reality. And just to kind of throw out there what's at stake, this is out of World Magazine. Don't try this. Frustrated by long waits in his nation's universal health care system, New Zealand resident John Griffin decided to try a home remedy for his heart condition. Don't try this at home, but Griffin waited 2 hours at an emergency room on April 2nd seeking treatment for an irregular heartbeat, then was told he would have to wait 6 more hours. Exasperated, the 69-year-old left for home. Once there, he noticed his neighbor's 8,000-volt electric fence. Griffin figured the electric shock from the fence probably wouldn't be so different from the defibrillator shock he had been waiting for. So he touched the fence, it gave me a decent belt, and my heart came right. Don't try this at home.
Do not try this
at home.
But
people will do anything.
Well, and just the other day we got talking about when you had this one president of one of the provinces in Canada, in Newfoundland, when he wanted to get surgery, did he go into the Canadian system? No, he came to the United States. When Adele, who is a very well-known singer in the UK, wanted to have throat surgery, did she do that at the British Health Service? No, she came to the United States. So even with all the problems, we still have one of the best healthcare systems in the world. But the question is, what about the insurance for some of the individuals?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Jeremy, you got something at the tip of your tongue? I'll just say that, we've got to keep it as close to a free market system as we can. You still have to incentivize the creation of new drugs, for instance, the creation of new medical devices. One of the things that was in Obamacare was a tax on medical devices. And just for the few times that I've touched the healthcare system, I've been amazed at the devices that are out there that, that do things that, help people and make it so that you don't have to stay in the hospital and things like that. So, we have to keep our incentives in there for private companies to be able to make a profit, to be able to do these things. So that's one part of it. And then we also have to make it so that the truly poor can get health care. One thing that Obamacare did was it just pulled so many people into Medicaid that were able-bodied. And this, both the House and the Senate plans, and the Senate plan is being critiqued for it now, is trying to reverse that and make the states responsible for Medicaid. Right now, there's a huge incentive for states to put a lot of people onto Medicaid. and it's trying to pull that incentive away, because that's one of the things that's made it so expensive.
You know, one of the other ones is what's called guaranteed issue, or the fact that you have to cover pre-existing conditions. And both of these bills try to recognize that there are two kinds of pre-existing conditions. The one is, my child is born with cystic fibrosis, Down syndrome, muscular dystrophy. This is a chronic issue. The other kind is the individual that says, you know, since it's guaranteed issue, I don't have to have insurance, but as soon as I have a medical procedure I need to do, well, then I'll sign up for that, and I will not have to have paid all those years. Well, they have a system here by which you have to sign up at a certain amount of time, and if you don't, there's certain penalties. So it really prevents, and is an attempt to prevent, those people who are gaming the system, staying out of the system and only jumping into the system when they need it and then pulling back out. And so if you understand that, of course, that will get lost in all of the cacophony of they are going to throw people off the cliff and there are people are going to die out on the streets, Senator Warren and all the others that have been saying this. But I think that's an understanding that there are two different kinds of pre-existing conditions, and to treat people that obviously have needs is very different than those who are really trying to game the system.
That's right. And in healthcare, we all expect to have more and more of it without paying another dollar for it.
We want someone else to pay for it, just not us.
That's exactly right. And look, I can understand the impulse behind that. No one wants to pay more money, and none of us want to be ill, so it makes some sense. But with the advance in healthcare comes the expense with it as well. We've gotten away from the idea, though, that we're responsible for those costs. That it's not a guarantee in life, that in a first principle sort of way, that any of us are guaranteed to be healthy, nor the right to pursue our own health, or the right to have health care itself.
It's not in the Constitution?
Yeah, I don't think so. No, and it's not even on our DNA makeup. It's something that we're responsible for. So we need to remember, putting it in kind of a worldview context, that we are in fact fallen creatures subject to the fall, and because of that, our bodies are subject to their own fall and debilitation. So once we're born, we're all born with a state of a terminal disease called life, and we're eventually going to find our way towards that grave. And how we get from one to the other, there's a lot of different paths that takes in terms of health and all that sort of thing. But the reality is, the healthcare is going to continue to improve by technology, which means that it's going to cost more money, and we're going to have to find more creative solutions to be able to afford that kind of thing. But we should not be the ones that are expecting the government to be the one to pick up that bill.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about, is it possible that we really can charge people differently based upon their health? If you're 85 years of age and you have all sorts of chronic diseases that you've dealt with, and maybe even some that have come to you, is that fair to treat you the same as an individual that's maybe 25 and runs marathons? And so that's an important question, because under Obamacare, you can only differentiate about 3 to 1. Under these new bills, it's 5 to 1. But we'll talk about some of that as well and give you a chance to join our conversation. Some of the calls are coming in, 1-800-351-1212. But let me also mention, as we go to the break, this would be a great time for you to consider what you might do to support this ministry. Coming to the end of our fiscal year, and we certainly need to end it in the black. So as we go to a break, you might want to go to the website, pointofview.net, click on that button, and your gift will be doubled. Or let me also mention the pledge line. That is an important opportunity for you to talk to someone who'd be glad to take your phone call and get the information and take your pledge. That number is 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Love to hear from you, and it is certainly important for us to end our fiscal year in the black, so anything you can do to help us financially would be greatly appreciated. We'll be right back.
Tell me if you can identify with this. The news is on, or you're reading comments online, and your immediate reaction is, what planet are these people from? There are giant chasms in America, a time when people can't even talk to each other without resorting to violence, fueled with false information peddled via biased, one-sided reporting, other things left out entirely. Christians are called to be truth-tellers and peacemakers. While others are shouting at each other across the chasm, we are called to build bridges. You're among 1.4 million people Point of View Radio reaches, giving you tools to build those bridges. Today, the investment you make, the gift you give, will be doubled up to $10,000. That's mental and spiritual infrastructure repair our culture desperately needs. Won't you join us today, please? Visit pointofview.net, click the red Donate Now button, or call for details 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Double your gift. Do it today. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. It is our weekend edition. Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dye's with us. And again, we are talking about a couple of different issues. One, of course, the American Health Care Act, and then the Better Care Reconciliation Act, passed by the Senate. Let's take some phone calls, and we'll get back into some of the specifics of these two bills. First of all, we'll go to Louisiana, WPAE, and TJ. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, thanks, Kerby. My question is, it's fun. I'm one of the lucky ones that, have insurance through my employer.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, we're a lot of smart people in this world. And I just don't understand how come we can't come to a, happy medium. You know what I'm saying? Like,
sure.
If you pay, like, let's just say, for instance, I'm going to give you an answer. If you pay $5,000 per year per premium for your health care, then you have a deductible of $2,500. That's a lot of money.
It is.
And then if you're a healthy person, you may not ever go to the doctor. And where does that $7,000 go? It just goes, who does it go to? You see what I'm saying?
I do.
I don't understand how come we can't come to some kind of happy medium to where it's fair for everyone, and not so expensive. I mean, I understand that, technology is, keeps growing and growing and growing, but I just don't understand how come we can't come to some kind of, agreement of what's fair and what's not. And I'm going to hang up and listen to you.
And you've really raised some good issues. Number one, let me just give Ted Cruz a little bit of a compliment, because one of the amendments he wants to add is that indeed we certainly have this Senate Better Care Reconciliation Act, but he also wants to have an amendment which would allow insurers to provide other policies that maybe don't fit the Title I requirements. In other words, every policy had to have 10 things. We can go into that in just a minute ago, but there are all sorts of people that have said, well, I'm 65. I really don't think I need maternity, for example. I don't need coverage for these kinds of things. And in the past, TJ, one of the things that made it possible for people in your state of Louisiana, or the example I love to use is Georgia, where the biggest sticker shock seemed to take place, is there were some less expensive policies. Now, we recognize they were cheaper. They didn't cover as much, but people said, fine, I'm pretty healthy and I don't need all of these mandates in this policy, but I do want to have something to protect me if there's something catastrophic that takes place. So one of the things that Ted Cruz has proposed is that, yes, every insurer would have to provide at least one policy that met the criterion of Obamacare, but they would be free in those states to provide some other alternatives. And that seems to be what TJ's asking for.
Yeah, one of the things was you could apply in your state for some sorts of waivers, and I think both bills have something about this.
The waivers, yeah, but this would be where you get it without the waivers, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
so you might have waivers for certain things that the bill has to cover under Obamacare or under these other bills, but you could waive some of them. It would be a state decision. And then, some of the other things that Ted Cruz had talked about is allowing the purchase of insurance across state lines,
yes,
and also capping awards for malpractice awards and things like that. Just certain things to reduce the costs, because that's one of the problems with this House and Senate bill, is that we really don't know that they'll reduce premiums, and that's been kind of the reason for doing all this, or one of the big reasons, the popular reasons, is to reduce premiums.
One of the other ones, Jeremy, I want to come to you for just a minute, is the requirement that you have to buy insurance. And that brings us all the way back to the Supreme Court and Justice John Roberts, because I'm not a constitutional scholar like you are, but I look at the Commerce Clause, and it doesn't seem to me to justify forcing me to buy anything, whether it's a brisket or whether it's insurance. And yet right now we have this ability to force people to buy insurance. And people like TJ might even say, I'm not sure I want to buy insurance.
But I want to say this very clearly and carefully. I am very much in favor of forcing you to buy me brisket.
And that has been done today.
Yeah, so whatever, we've got to work that out. Let's pass that law very quickly. But
okay.
No, the reality is, I mean, you read my mind here, is that the assumption in TJ's question is that we've got to be having health care. And there are plenty of people that just simply say, I don't want to have health care. Now, they can say that, but they need to understand if you don't plan ahead in advance with health insurance capacity, so that when you do meet, hey, I go from healthy to not healthy overnight with a heart attack or something that you didn't see coming, or getting hit by a bus and not having that leg work anymore, you have got to be able to be the one that is actually providing that pre-planning to pay for that. It's going to be expensive. And you can't have that come to the government and say, I want you to pick up my tab for my own failure to plan ahead. We've gotten away from that common sense in this world to where we're now saying everybody must have health care, and the government must be the one to provide that health care and force you to purchase that health care. There are plenty of people out there that simply say, I do not want to have the health care, and I would rather work with my friends or my colleagues or some others to share that cost.
Yeah, health sharing plan like MediShare or
exactly.
Samaritan's Ministries,
or simply go without it and say, I'm just going to pay out of my cash because, God has blessed me with an abundance of cash to be able to do that. I can't personally do that. That's why I provide for insurance for my family. But I choose within my own level of insurance what level I'm going to bear the risk in terms of my weekly salary being deducted from that and that sort of thing. It is responsible. You and I, each individual person, is required to provide for that. It is not the government's job to do that. And that's how far afield we've gotten from this. And what I actually worry about with this current debate is that our even our conservative senators and congressmen are forgetting that. They're actually playing on the assumption that everybody needs to have or should have or must have health care. And that can't be further from the truth. If we go down that path, it's a guarantee towards some sort of government-imposed regulation, or at least a regulation light. So it's not a heavy fine. It's just a you got to do it or else kind of a threat. That's not the business of government. We ought to allow the market and the people within that market to not self-regulate, but to provide that service to people who want it. And what do you know? People will actually want it and purchase it.
I remember during the campaign when people were running on, I'm going to repeal Obamacare, every jot and tittle, and when we passed Obamacare, we made a change in the country that I fear is impossible to reverse all the way. We did what Jeremy just talked about. More than we had already done ever before, we put the onus of providing health care on the government. And so it's taken a very short time for the citizens of America, the bulk of them, to transfer that responsibility for health care onto the government and to feel in their bones and their heart of hearts that it's the government's responsibility. And for us, even though that's only been since it 2014 when it took effect, and 2010 when it passed. But in that sort of a time, it's become an entitlement. And to take it away now, I really doubt that we can ever fully do it. And that's why I feel that we've got to try to make this as free market as possible and then take it.
And if you needed an indication for why the government should not be doing that, they can't deliver the mail on time.
Right.
They can't deliver the mail in a budget. Why do we expect that the IRS is going to be able to administrate a health care system for 330 million people?
It would be like the VA, and that hasn't actually been working out so very well. We'll talk about a couple of other reasons that TJ brought up, and that is, why is it taking so long, and why is it so difficult? We have a lot of smart people. There are some major obstacles. We'll talk about those right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, there was a time 50 years ago when we had fewer safety devices and less parental supervision. Yet most of us survived. Some of us had accidents, but others were lucky to get out of childhood without even as much as a broken bone. Edward Costner writes about accidents in his column on how not to step on that banana peel. He quotes from Steve Kastner, author of the book Careful, A User's Guide to Our Injury-Prone Minds, that deaths from accidents declined for decades but now have begun to rise. The rise in accidents is due to everything from smartphones and driving distractions to the reality that people are living longer and thus have more opportunities to die in accidents. Why do we have these avoidable accidents? One reason I just mentioned are distractions. It turns out that people can't really concentrate on multiple tasks. We convince ourselves that we can do it when we can't. In fact, we have trouble concentrating on a single task for very long before our attention wanders. He says multitasking is a myth. It generally means doing two things badly at the same time. Remind yourself or someone to do something in a few minutes and it will be forgotten. A second major reason for preventable accidents is overconfidence. Steve Kastner's book surveys research done by a number of psychologists. Their studies invariably show that people are overconfident about their own capabilities, more open to risk than they imagine, less cool in a crisis, and prone to error. And a third reason is what is called risk homeostasis. This is the tendency of people to accelerate their dangerous behavior when new safety features are introduced, say by driving even faster in cars with the latest safety technology. So many accidents are avoidable if we apply some of the lessons psychologists have learned. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice. Let me just mention real quickly, one of the things that Ted Cruz has proposed as one of his amendments is that you, if you're an insurance company, could actually have a plan. You would have to have at least one that would actually fit what are the 10 criteria or essential health benefits, but that you would have others that wouldn't have those. Now, a lot of people say, well, what are the 10? I won't read all 10, but let me pick out a few just to illustrate why this makes these policies so expensive. And that's kind of TJ's question a minute ago. One of the 10 is maternity and newborn care. Okay, if you're 65 years of age, probably maternity is not going to matter to you. Another one, pediatric services, including oral and vision care. Okay, if you are a childless couple or you're single, you don't really need that one either, do you? One more, mental health and substance use disorder services. Well, that could be all sorts of things, and really one of the things that rather dramatically increases the sticker shock that we all faced when we began to go out there on the open market and look for some of these policies. So what Ted Cruz has proposed, and we'll see whether or not something like that would pass, would be allowing some individuals to have a policy that's cheaper and maybe isn't covering everything, but still is within the price range of a lot of the listeners to Point of View who call in all the time and say, I just can't afford this. I wouldn't mind having a catastrophic policy. I wouldn't mind having something that covers some things but not others. But when the cheapest policy is so much more expensive and then the deductibles are so high, I know I'll be paying a lot of money for something I'll never use.
You know, it used to be that insurance didn't cover everything. There were a lot of things that you just knew that you were going to have to pay for yourself, and there were things that people thought you could probably choose to do or not. I mean, of course, maternity, that's necessary for some people.
Sure.
But it's also something you can save for and plan for as parents. And chiropractic care is pretty much covered by most policies now. But, I mean, I remember paying for that 20 years ago. Mental health is, now there's just been a lobby for that. So it's pretty much covered, but it didn't used to be. If you went to counseling appointments and things like that, you paid for them. And so, I think that we should be able to make choices about that. We should be able to be consumers and to purchase the kind of policy that we think we're going to need.
And refuse things we don't want to pay for.
Right.
And demand through the market that way that things go down. See if if you remember back in this, I was a little kid when this was going on, but I remember it well when Ma Bell was still Ma Bell. And you could only buy Ma Bell's phone, right? The cost of phones were not cheap, and the cost of using a phone was not cheap. We break up Ma Bell, and all of a sudden you can get a cheap rotary phone. For those of you who are of the millennial generation, that means a phone that's stuck on a wall that you could not walk around the country with. You had to actually be in the house to use it. But that allowed eventually us to go from the rotary phone to the cordless phone to the wireless phone to the cell phone, where we're able to now drop in the middle of anywhere and have a phone and have phone access on things. The point is that on healthcare, we're expecting the government to somehow make this more reasonable. That is never in the history of governments shown to be the case. Anywhere you go, the government will never make things less expensive and less cumbersome. They will always make it more expensive and more cumbersome. What was it Ronald Reagan said one time about that? Like, the scariest words to ever hear is, I'm here from the government, I'm here to help. That the government has not been the government is necessary, it is useful, but it's never been something that has been profoundly helpful at times on issues like this that are better left to you and I to be responsible for. And that gets us to the point, right? We have abandoned ideas of self-responsibility, right. Human responsibility, our own self-reliance, to the point where you read that article about the guy grabbing the wire. And my thought was, no, that was like Australia or whatever it was.
New Zealand.
That was like good old-fashioned, American do-it-yourselfmanship, right? Where has that gone? Now, I'm not asking that we stitch up our own wounds or conduct our own heart surgery on things. Of course not. But there's got to be a way that we can solve issues of health care and health insurance outside of the government having to do it. It is not our mother. It is not our father. It is not responsible for our health and our ongoing well-being. It is just to provide us the space to pursue that happiness.
And as we're finding out, as we have found out through Obamacare, things become too expensive so people can't afford them. So then you have to make choices and you have to make calculations. And, if we would just learn from other countries in Europe and other places that have had national health care, you end up with rationing. You end up with the government deciding who gets health care and who doesn't. You get the government deciding what medicines that they will cover and what they won't. Some of the best and most effective medicines then won't be covered. Whereas in our country, people can make choices. And, you just end up with the government, who is the last entity you want making decisions about your health. Your health is the most important and valuable thing that you own here on this earth. And to have the government making those decisions of what you can and cannot do to preserve it, that's something we don't want. I think Reagan talked about that too, because it's really making a decision about your life, your very life. It's a life and death decision.
And don't forget innovation, right? When the government says, well, this is all we're going to have and no further, what is the inspiration? What is the motive for us to try to get a better MRI machine? Well, this one will work for right now because that's all the government's going to want us to do. Think about it this way. If you're a student and the teacher says, here's a test for you, and you do the test and you know that you only miss one question, but someone else misses half of the questions, but everybody gets an 80. And you do that for a period of weeks, what are you going to start doing? You're going to stop trying on these things. And pretty soon, the guy who's getting the 50 on the test and the guy who's getting the 90, that are both aiming for a 50, and the government's giving them an 80. It's a demotivational concept on things here. You wouldn't want that in your high school geography class. Why would you want that as a part of your health care?
Yes. One of the other things TJ was asking is, why can't we put these smart people together and come up with an answer? And part of it has to do with the lobbies. And that is back in 2010, and even before that, 2009, there was a meeting where the president, in that case, President Barack Obama, brought together the insurance companies and said, if you help us, then we'll help you. The way we'll help you is we'll require everybody to buy insurance. And so the insurance company said, well, that's a good deal because there are a lot of people that aren't buying our policies right now. What I don't think they saw is that all of a sudden cooperating with the government turned out to not necessarily be the best thing that worked out. And so this is the difficulty that you have right now. You not only have smart people, but you have very different views of health care. Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have a very different view about what the government should do in terms of health care compared to, say, Mike Lee and Ted Cruz. But what even complicates it more is the insurance companies. They want to make sure they get their piece of the pie, and because they are very much involved in giving various campaign donations to various individuals, it's very difficult sometimes to come up with a truly free market kind of plan.
It's difficult, but I think the goal of the left is to squeeze out the insurance companies and just
ultimately
have government-provided health care, and we don't want that either. So we've got to be careful, and we want, I think part of Obamacare made sure the insurance companies survived financially and gave them, certain bailouts and things like that, which we all hate. So we want another way that the insurance companies could survive in a free market, and that, I think the heads that come together have to come up with that. I think one thing, I wish that it hadn't been written so secretly, in a sense.
Yes, me too.
But now it's out in the open, and now senators are going to be debating it and adding amendments, and so we'll be able to kind of pay attention to the pieces and parts.
One other thing to remind TJ about, as well as all of us here, is that his question, whether I wrote it down, he said, how come we can't come to some happy medium on things? I'm going to circle the word we on that sentence, because what we constantly tend to do is to say, why can't they come to some sort of common solution of things? And the question to be asked of yourself, TJ, myself, all of us, is what am I doing right now to ensure that my senators listening to what I'm saying? This is after the land of the self-governed, and we are the ones that are controlling this government, not simply by our votes every 2, 4, or 6 years, but by our individual participation. And so my hope is that those of you that are in Texas have called Senator Cruz and Senator Cornyn, that those of you outside of the state are calling your United States senators and letting them be known. There's an 800 number for the White House that you can tell President Trump what you think about the matter. Or there's a direct flight from here to Washington, D.C. every single day, multiple times a day from Dallas to Washington, D.C. Get on a plane there and go meet with your lawmakers. You'd be surprised how quickly you can talk to people who would have information.
You might also want to do one other thing. I noticed one of our callers wanted to talk about that, and since she didn't get on, I'll just mention it. That is to tell them to get back to work. The Freedom Caucus right now has said we should not have a recess. Can you believe this? Here it is. We're almost in July, and pretty soon they're going to have a recess. And you're going...
And we've got these important issues hanging over our heads.
Let's see. We've got tax reform. We've got immigration reform. We've got, are we ever going to build a wall? We don't even have a budget yet, which is going to be implemented, and some of the others. So you might also say, get to work and don't come home. Get some work done. So that's another issue that you might bring to them as well. Let's take a break. We'll come back and give some of you an opportunity to join our conversation. 1-800-351-1212. Let me also encourage you to consider what you might do to support this ministry as we come into fiscal year end. All that information's on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back with more right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. By the end of the program, I do want to talk a little bit about how you can help us as we end our fiscal year, but let's take some phone calls. Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice with us, and we'll go to Richard in Georgia on WLPE. Richard, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Kerby, how are you doing today?
Very good.
Hey, I just want to comment and kind of agree with what Penna said about difficulty in changing this Obamacare, because we've already put this bait out there and the people have taken it to a certain level, And then, of course, it's all about control, that the Democrats want to control. They will never go against anything that the Republicans put out there to go against Obamacare, because that is their prime thing in the sky, you know. And so it's a shame. And you know what? The other second part of that is what really bothers me is that the Republicans have an opportunity to do something right now. And they're coming to the plate, and they're not confident in what they got. I mean, if they got 4 people that want to go against this, let's go back and regroup, because we already failed once. We do it again, we're going to look like buffoons. So that's all I wanted to say. But thank you very much for hearing me out.
Very good points.
Amazingly enough, too, the time factor, because, you know, when you get too close to an election, then you can't do anything. I mean, that's just the way government works. So it has to be done quickly. That's why they shouldn't go on recess, because they need to get something done with Obamacare, and they need to make it as good and free market and conservative as they can. They just really need to do that. They have to be realistic about what they can do, I think. But they need, if they lose 2 votes, they can still pass it with Mike Pence. But that's not very much margin.
Well, and again, I get the sense that Rand Paul, Mike Lee, and certainly Ted Cruz are just wanting to at least do a few modifications. Right. And, of course, I mentioned the Ted Cruz particular amendment, one of his, and that would be allowing the various insurance companies to be able to have those which meet the mandates, but others that were less expensive. So that would be something. This particular bill actually repeals the expansion of Medicaid, and it gives the states some tools. Another one I mentioned just a minute ago, but I didn't go into it in much detail. Remember my illustration of somebody that's, say, 85 versus 25. Right now, we have, in a sense, made young people pay a lot more, healthy people pay a lot more, because you couldn't have more than a 3-to-1 difference between those 2 premiums. This bill at least expands it to 5-to-1. And so there's a number of things in here that are positive. Is it what a purist around the table like us would like? No. But is it a whole lot better than what we have right now? Yes. And would it allow for states and various insurance companies to have a lot more freedom and flexibility? Well, right now they have basically handcuffs on them because of Obamacare.
Yeah, they do. You know, I think we kind of got used to the fact in this country that if you were older, you'd pay more for health care. And we turned that around very quickly. But I think that one is so intuitive that I don't think it would be that hard to sell.
Yeah, no. If we can looking at the various changes, need to have them all on the table. But you know, we've gotten so far down the road on this process that we're now just now talking about the changes. It's a little late in the game to be doing all that. Look, I understand that the senators need to be doing that, need to be providing those things even up into the 11th hour. But look, this Congress, the Senate, did not come to the table realizing that certain things needed to be met. They just simply haven't walked to that table trying to meet them, it seems like. I think that's what part of Richard's point is here. He says, look, guys, no one was confused about what wanted to happen here, what the people wanted to have done. You've not done that once. Thank goodness that failed. Don't make a second mistake at it, because you're not going to get a third bite at the apple.
That's for sure. And again, Alan West was on the program recently, and he just said, you know, it's not like this caught anybody off surprise. You know, it's not like that all of a sudden this passed in 2016, and here we are in 2017 in January with a Republican president, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate, and say, oh, my goodness, what are we going to do about this? You know, these things should not take as long as they have, and a consensus should have been developed a long time ago, don't you think?
It's kind of amazing. I mean, you've had, you know, the brightest minds out there thinking about it. You've had think tanks like the Heritage Foundation putting plans out. You've had members of Congress floating plans. But I guess everybody, you know, maybe too many cooks. I don't know what it is. I like a lot of cooks.
Yeah.
I don't think it spoils the pot, but somehow you have to get organized.
If there's anything that this does, it does allow a lot more flexibility for the states, because, you know, we've been quoting Ronald Reagan a lot, but let's use that one more time. And that is, he said, really, the states should be the laboratories for democracy. And we already knew that Obamacare wasn't going to work because we had what? Romney Care.
Yeah.
And we also recognized that maybe giving states more flexibility to deal with Medicaid makes a lot more sense. Giving insurance companies a little more flexibility in providing various kinds of plans, that makes more sense. But when you have this top-down control, as I've said before, if you haven't liked what your insurance company would let you do or not do, and were very upset that some insurance actuary was making decisions about that, you're not going to be any happier about an unelected bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. making those decisions.
Yeah, and let's drive that fine point home is to say that the reason we don't want that the reason we want people to be pushing it further to the local level, from the United States Senate down to the Texas legislature or the Rhode Island legislature or the South Dakota legislature, the reason for that is that the closer this gets to the people, the more we are inclined to preserve freedom. So what is at stake here is not simply another bureaucracy or simply another regulation or new law, but really and truly what is at stake is an idea of, are we going to be a self-governed people that believes in the idea of freedom that allows you and I to be able to pursue that happiness? Or are we going to be dictated to by a centralized government at the federal level, a federalist government that says, no, we're going to tell you what to believe? There's a fundamental worldview difference here in between the liberals and the conservatives here. One says government should be your motivating factor and provide everything for you. The conservatives, at least in the past, have said, no, that belongs to us as the people. We didn't give up those rights. That belongs to me. And so government's best utility is to stay out of their way and to make sure that they're able to pursue that happiness without over-regulation of things. Go back to Justice Roberts' opinion, as you referenced earlier in the program. Justice Roberts says, look, the people, this is a tax, and the people are able to vote themselves into a tax if they want to. At the same time, they've got the right to vote themselves out of it.
That's a good point. You know, again, this mindset that the bureaucrat knows better what's good for you than anyone else brings me to one of my favorite stories from Phil Gramm. Used to be a senator from the state of Texas. Penna's heard it before, but I think it's worth telling at least one more time. And that is when they were having this big debate about Hillary care, back when Hillary was the first lady. There was a testimony before the United States Senate, and at one point Phil Gramm said to one of the bureaucrats, which at that time was Health, Education, Welfare, later became HHS, I guess it was HHS by that time, and he said, you know, I really think I know better for what my family needs in terms of health care than you do. And the bureaucrat looked at him and said, no, Senator Gramm, we care as much about your children as you do. And Senator Gramm said, really? What are their names? You know, and it just got a laugh all the way there because, you know, you don't know my family. You don't know our needs. And this kind of paternalistic idea that as a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., you know as much about what my family needs as I do is bizarre. And yet that's exactly the mindset that some bureaucrats actually have.
And look, I want to just give a plug for Point of View on this very point, because what you're receiving here right now and you receive every day when you listen is the chance to think through these issues and to break through some of the wah-wah clutter that you hear on the news these days that all seem to have this wonderful bloviated idea of themselves. But you have here saying, hey, wait, stop and think about this. Look at the first principles behind these issues. Don't just take it for their word of it only. Make sure you think through these things from the perspective of your own worldview.
So again, that's one of the reasons why we encourage you to support this ministry. Penna, you've been around long enough to know some of the financial needs here at Point of View.
Certainly, we don't have any government funding. We don't have commercials selling products. We have listeners who believe in our outreach and our ministry and support us, and so this is a time of year when, number one, it's summer, so that's a little harder sometimes, but also we're coming to our fiscal year end, and we have a deadline, and I think we have a matching grant too, Kerby.
We will certainly do. Again, that's something I want you to consider, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but just since we had this wonderful setup by Jeremy, I thought I would mention again that if you go to our website, Help Bridge the Great Divide, and it's a section that says Give Now. One of the things we really encourage you to do is to visit that website, and as you do so, we have some suggested giving amounts, and your match is doubled. This is something which we appreciate because of the generosity of a few donors who have come to us from time to time, said, you know, we're going to give to you, but I'll tell you what, we'll also help encourage other people to give, and this is something a lot of ministries have done. And I remember years ago, we never did that until one day Rebecca Haglund called in and said, you know what, I'll pledge $1,000 and I want it to be a match. And we go, well, we never thought about that before. And ever since then, we've said, you know, that was helpful then and it would be helpful now. So if, again, you would like to make a gift of just $100, essentially it becomes $200. So again, it's available at the website, pointofview.net. Don't forget, we still have a pledge line where you can talk to people, 800-347-5151. We'll be right back.
At Army bases across the country, mandatory transgender integration training began last week that will extend to all officers and civilians who work with soldiers. The United States Army is preparing leaders to deal with biological men being allowed in women's showers, gender transition care, including gender reassignment funded by the taxpayer, and even male pregnancies. The policy undermines privacy, already in short supply in the military. It requires that service members' sleeping bathroom and shower facilities be assigned according to a person's gender marker. This is the gender on a person's birth certificate and official documents. A person who goes through a gender transition can get their gender marker changed. So women who are uncomfortable showering with biological men will either have to convince their commanders to make special accommodations or put up with it. Our taxes will fund this nonsense. On July 1st of last year, the military began allowing transgender service members to serve openly. On July 1st of this year, the military services are scheduled to begin allowing transgender individuals to join the armed forces. The new policy also allows for a person's gender transition to take place after he or she has joined the military, with the related care and treatment, other than gender reassignment surgery, provided within the military system for medical care. Here's a scenario in a training vignette. A soldier undergoes a transition from female to male, but without surgery. This soldier then stops taking hormones in order to start a family. A soldier who then becomes pregnant is entitled to the same prenatal and other medical care, administrative entitlements, and leave other pregnant soldiers get. The taxpayer funded the female to male transition and is also on the hook for the pregnancy. This is nuts and risks making the military a magnet for the gender confused. The current administration is under pressure and may revise this Obama-era directive. The Department of Defense should abolish it completely. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And we certainly have talked about health care, and I'll still take some phone calls, so we'll get to those in just a minute. But if you listen to Point of View, especially on computer, you know that Monday through Thursday you get to hear Jeremy doing the very excellent First Liberty commentaries. But on Friday, you also get to hear Penna Dexter's commentary. We just heard it a minute ago, the transgender military policy. And since that is the column that we have posted here for people to read, let me encourage you that if you haven't signed up to receive these commentaries, you receive mine Monday through Friday and hers on Saturday. But you can also, of course, listen to them and read them, and they're posted right now on the website, pointofview.net. But Penna, real quickly, this idea of transgender military policy, who would have guessed a few, even years ago, much less decades ago, we'd be talking about that the bathroom and shower facilities would be assigned according to a person's gender marker.
Yeah, the gender marker can be changed. Your gender marker is your biological gender, but then you can change that, and you can have it actually changed on your birth certificate. And, you know, that's kind of what's happening in the military. Because there was a promise made by by Ash Carter, who was the Secretary of Defense, that said that we would integrate transgenders into the military. They stopped back about a year ago, July 1st of 2016. They stopped throwing people out because they found out they were transgender, and they allowed them to serve openly after that date. Well, the next big date is coming up at the end of this week. And as of July 1st of this week, they will be able to actually usher transgender people into the military. And with that comes the medical care. So if someone comes in and they decide that they want to be the opposite sex, they can actually get the medical treatment. Not the actual reassignment surgery, but all the rest. So the government, again, footing the bill for this, number one. But number two, the effect on readiness and the effect on morale of just such a radical policy. And mind you, Congress doesn't have their fingers on this anywhere. This is all just military policy that's been basically decreed by the Department of Defense. The way to get rid of it is to have Congress formulate a policy and pass it.
You can remember the conversations we had in the 1990s about whether it made any sense to put men and women in a submarine, men and women in the same barracks. Now, we then, of course, had the conversation about whether or not to have don't ask, don't tell, homosexuality. Now we're in transgender. You have a scenario here that just a training scenario that I had never thought about, but talk about that for a minute.
It sounds outlandish, but it's actually part of the training because after it was announced, after this whole policy was announced, all the branches of the military, especially the Army, started doing training in anticipation of the new policy. So there's a vignette in the training. A soldier undergoes a transition from female to male. They do all the hormones, but they don't do the surgery because the government doesn't pay for that. This soldier then stops taking hormones in order to start a family. The soldier who then becomes pregnant, because that person has come back to being female, is entitled to the same prenatal and other medical care, the administrative entitlements, and the leave that other pregnant soldiers get. So the taxpayer has funded their transition with the hormones, and then they've also funded the pregnancy when they've come back to being their original gender.
So someone looks like a man, has a baby. Right? Yeah, is pregnant, has a baby, right there in the military. Jeremy, you're raising two boys in the midst of this. You must just be going nuts with some of the things that we're now talking about here in the 21st century.
It's worse than that. I'm raising four boys in the midst of all this whole thing. So it's twice as bad, I suppose. But look, I look around for my sons to be able to see good and positive role models as what it means to be a man. And I find myself reaching back further into decades to be able to show that to them. I have them look at their grandfather and see what he's accomplished and what he's done and being loyal to his wife for 50 years next Friday, as a matter of fact. And that's the kind of people I want my young men seeing. And I want them to be able to develop their relationships with teammates that are pulling towards the same goal of things. These are simple concepts. I was hearing someone talk today, I think it was Dr. Moeller, as a matter of fact, talking about how there are some studies that basically are saying your kids can't have any fun this summer because anywhere they go, they can't play in the sandbox because they'll get sick, and they certainly can't dig in the sand of the ocean because they'll get even sicker. And you can't have the kids wear any kind of floral print because the bees will come after them. I mean, we've kind of lost our minds on a lot of fronts. So. Where I do want my sons feeling the point of a little bit of controlled danger, so they know how to react in those situations, but also to be able to develop their own sense of ability. I realized just a week or two ago, as a matter of fact, I let my 11-year-old mow the lawn by himself from start to finish without me even seeing him doing it.
Very good.
I love the fact that he did it, but I realized at the time, I was like, oh my goodness, he could have cut his toes off or something. I had that moment of worry on things, but I had taught him the safety mechanics. I had taught him how to do it all. A year ago, he couldn't pull the string on. He wasn't strong enough, and now he can. We ought to be encouraging our kids to be able to have more and more opportunities like that. And find for them good examples, because our modern era is not providing them for us in the media. My commentary today is about how 50 years ago we had fewer safety devices, and a lot of us actually made it through without even so much as a broken arm. And today, we just have the most protected generation. Let's take at least one more phone call, because we'll get back to this issue of health care. In South Carolina, Daryl, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, I keep hearing everybody refer to the deal going through Congress is health care, and the Obamacare is health care, but it is health insurance.
It really is insurance, right?
Care.
Yeah.
I know a man that you said before he had health insurance, he had health care because he would go to a clinic and pay for whatever he needed. He said, but now, after the Obamacare, rather than get fined or whatever, he paid a big chunk out of his paycheck and had an enormous amount of deductible. He said now he's got health insurance, but he doesn't have health care because he can't afford to use the insurance.
Yeah, we had a guy the other day basically said that, before I was able to take care of myself. Now I just spend more and more money and I have nothing to show for it,
You have to wonder, too, how much, it would be a probably complicated calculation, but how much the price of our health insurance and our health care is inflated because the government has become so involved in it.
I'm sure it is. Yeah.
If we could just go to clinics and kind of make decisions based on a little bit on cost and on need, but insurance wasn't involved or government was involved, we probably have a more basic cost.
I know all of us have at one time or another gone to doctors and said, I'd rather just pay cash. Yeah. And sometimes the nurse or the receptionist looks at you like you have two heads or something like that. And then when they actually charge you, you go, well, why is this like a third of what you would have charged me if it went to the insurance company? And
well, if you do have two heads, that's probably why health insurance is so expensive these days, because it takes a lot of money to remove one of those. But the caller's exactly right. And this is why shows like this are necessary, and for us to engage our worldview when we get into these issues, because we've got to be able to sift through the messaging of the day, the rhetoric of the day. And I'll tell you that the choice of terming this as health care was exceedingly intentional. It was overwhelmingly intentional, so that you would say, oh, well, who's against providing health care for people after all, right? It's health insurance. Nobody likes insurance stuff, and I know I don't, having to deal with it all, but people definitely want to have health care. So learn how to view your world correctly by listening to this show 2 hours a day.
Well, again, this is one of the reasons why I encourage people to give to this ministry. We're just about out of time. And again, Jeremy, thank you for coming today, and always appreciate the good work at First Liberty. Don't forget, they are also in the midst of raising their funds, and I just sent my check out to First Liberty the other day, so I want to encourage you to support that ministry as well as ours. And Penn, I know that you certainly have been following all the things at First Liberty. They're just doing an outstanding job, aren't they?
They are, and I love that you keep people informed about what you're doing and the cases, so we understand the threat that's out there.
Well, I sent my check. I encourage you to do so, and I hope that you'll consider sending a check or actually making a pledge. And as we go off the air, let me mention the pledge line again. It is 800-347-5151. Of course, you can also go to the website, pointofview.net, and I would encourage you to do so. We'd love to hear from you. Going to have a great weekend, and we look forward to a very good program next week. Want to thank Andrew, Alyssa, Shamila, and everyone else who've been a part of this program. We'll see you back on Monday.
Tell me if you can identify with this. The news is on, or you're reading comments online, and your immediate reaction is, what planet are these people from? There are giant chasms in America, a time when people can't even talk to each other without resorting to violence, fueled with false information peddled via biased, one-sided reporting, other things left out entirely. Christians are called to be truth-tellers and peacemakers. While others are shouting at each other across the chasm, we are called to build bridges. You're among 1.4 million people Point of View Radio reaches, giving you tools to build those bridges. Today, the investment you make, the gift you give, will be doubled up to $10,000. That's mental and spiritual infrastructure repair our culture desperately needs. Won't you join us today, please? Visit pointofview.net, click the red Donate Now button, or call for details 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Double your gift. Do it today. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.